Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm proud to be the voice for my constituents of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex, and now as the new Shadow Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, on behalf of farmers and agri-producers, it's a tremendous honor and responsibility that I don't take lightly. Over the past several months, we have seen our country go through a lockdown where Canadians were asked to stay at home and keep safe, except for those who worked on the front lines. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the frontline workers and the farmers for helping us through this pandemic. Farmers stepped up to make sure that Canadians were fed, regardless of the obstacles that they faced, and the minimal help that they've received through the emergency response programs. And how were they repaid? The word agriculture does not even appear in the speech from the throne. I had hoped that the Liberal government would have used this opportunity to recognize the importance of agriculture, not only to feed Canadians, but as a critical pillar of our economy. I'm disappointed to see that once again, the agriculture sector is not a priority for this government. Agriculture should be included as a key component of Canada's economic recovery plan coming out of COVID. To be honest, I wasn't expecting much, but at the very least, it would have been nice to hear that it's understood that our agriculture sector has been through a lot, and that the unique challenges that threaten various farmers' livelihoods must be addressed. This would have gone a long way to tell my constituents and Canada's farmers that their voices have been heard. Admittedly, an ambitious plan that's responsive to the on-the-ground concerns before they metastasize into a food security crisis would have even been better. Contrary to Liberal beliefs, food does not just magically appear on the stores of our on the shelves of our grocery stores. Farmers, ranchers, and producers work tirelessly to ensure that Canadians have delicious, grown and raised in Canada food available to them on their grocery store shelves. When the pandemic initially hit, Canadians were caught by surprise, and the instinct to stock up kicked in. But for some reason, toilet paper was the first product on everyone's list. But the reassurance that farmers and food producers were up to the task of feeding Canadians and that we were not in danger of running out of food was not front of mind. It didn't take long, however, for most to recognize how fragile our way of life is. I'm grateful that Canadians don't have to worry about food availability on top of everything else. But it is this government's responsibility to be aware and to act proactively to ensure that Canada's food security remains unthreatened in the years to come. Madam Speaker, when it comes to actions, the Liberal government's track record of responding to the on-the-ground realities have a lot to be desired. There is anxiety from across the agricultural community about competitiveness, market access, reduced production, processing capacity, just to name a few. I sincerely hope that the government's actions will finally address their accumulating concerns, because if they don't, we may no longer be able to take for granted our current level of food security. Madam Speaker, we must ensure that our local food production remains stable in the face of uncertainty. Our domestic demand must also be able to be sustained by local production. Anything short of that would be negligent. 2020 has made it abundantly clear that when times are tough, we can only truly rely on our own very made-in-Canada safety net. So why is it, Madam Speaker, that the concerns and calls for action from those who feed us so often fall on the deaf ears of this government? If this government truly recognized the fragility of our food security and was serious about protecting it, we'd have seen it demonstrated with actions, or at the very least, with a promising throne speech. Sad to say, the throne speech did not provide much evidence that there was an epiphany on their part. Still, I'm going to remain hopeful that Canada's food security won't stay in this government's blind spot for much longer, and that we will soon witness a determination to do better. I truly hope that's the case, Madam Speaker, and I welcome every opportunity to work collaboratively with the Minister and with members across party lines to create the conditions where farmers can earn a living, knowing that their government will have their back if external factors outside of their control threaten their livelihood. The first step, and I'm hopeful that it's a common ground issue that we can get the ball rolling on right away, is modernizing the business risk management programs. The diversity of agriculture sector requires a more flexible solution than we currently have. The obstacles are different for different producers. the Agriculture Committee completed a study on business risk management and was ready to review the report right before Parliament prorogued. The FPT Ministers' meeting that was scheduled for October has now been moved to November, leaving time for the Agriculture Committee to resume its work on this report and get it to the Minister ahead of these meetings. It's important that industry can work collaboratively with all levels of government so that we can soon find long-term solutions to better manage risks and provide real stability to a sector that contributes so much to our rural communities and our economy. Likewise, Madam Speaker, I'm hopeful that the government will recognize the urgent need to sit down with beef and pork producers and processors to find actionable solution to solve the processing capacity bottleneck, especially in Ontario. Madam Speaker, aside from the immediate reduction in food output, many farmers are worried that they'll be pushed out of business if obstacles are not immediately removed. And yet, the message that was sent to farmers with the pennies on the dollar COVID relief package not only did not convey a sense of urgency, but proved yet again that farmers are not valued by this government. Canada's farmers are some of the hardest working people I've ever met. They're proud people, and they would never ask for a handout. But during this pandemic, they needed a hand up. Existing programs are not enough. Neither was the so-called relief package that was a drop in the bucket of what was required. Besides, a big chunk of that was not new money. It had already been budgeted for under the existing agro-recovery envelope prior to the pandemic. Family farms without a business account were not even able to take advantage of the Canada Emergency Business Account loans when they needed it the most. The bottom line is, this government was not there for our farmers while they were doing the incredible work of overcoming challenges to feed Canadians. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, this government's relationship with farmers doesn't stop with inaction. It's one thing to not help our farmers amidst external forces of instability, but it's a whole nother thing to have your government choose to inflict direct harm with destabilizing policies.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, it's troubling that this government continues to add rather than remove obstacles with punitive schemes such as the carbon tax.
Bingo.
The carbon tax is already a major cost for grain farmers. It is estimated that it will reduce their income by about 12% by 2022. There are only two options for drying grains: natural gas or propane. There are no alternatives. So whether it's to dry grain or to heat barns, these costs are significantly adding up, and they will continue costing more and more as the tax is scheduled to continue going up. But the ultimate impact of trying to phase out oil through these schemes, whether it punishes consumers or producers, is the inevitable rising costs of Canadian goods, which will make it impossible for our farmers to compete against foreign producers not subjected to these costs. How many farmers will have to go out of business if they're stifled from being able to compete? Madam Speaker, the availability of food on our shelves today is not an accurate picture of tomorrow's food security. It is paramount that this government recognizes the consequences of the policies that push farmers out of business. Because if the can is kicked down the road, this government will only have themselves to blame for failure to act proactively to secure our food supply. Rural Canadians do not feel represented by this government. That's because they're not. It is, however, Madam Speaker, the responsibility of this government to at least make an effort to govern on behalf of all Canadians. If they did, they would not only talk about connecting rural Canadians to high-speed broadband like they have for the last months and years, they'd actually do it. They'd recognize the amount of vetting that law-abiding firearms owners go through to get their licenses, and what hunting and sport shooting represents to our heritage, traditions, and communities. Likewise, they'd understand just how many hoops farmers have to jump through and what it feels like to have a government this far removed from the issues that impact their livelihoods. Madam Speaker, I urge this government to self-reflect and consider the long-term ramifications of pushing farmers away from doing what they love to do, I sincerely hope that upon reflection, we can all come to the common understanding that the neglect of our agriculture sector and of rural Canadians
I've allowed for quite a bit of time, and I've been trying to advise the member that the time was running out. I'm sure she'll be able to add to the questions and comments and finish anything of her speech that she wasn't able to. I'm sorry to interrupt. Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member King's hands.
My honourable colleague for her speech. I'd like to also recognize her new parliamentary role as the critic to the Minister of Agriculture and congratulate her on this as well. I listened very intently to her speech because, of course, agriculture is extremely important in my riding, and we do sit on the Agriculture Committee together. For people that might have been watching, Madam Speaker, they might have just thought, my God, this government has not mentioned agriculture at all. But when I look through the speech from the throne, and I want to correct the record, a lot of conversation around food insecurity, about local food infrastructure, supporting farmers with the transition to a low-carbon economy, a commitment to maintaining our supply management compensation and the mitigation efforts for those sectors. And as it relates to COVID, Madam Speaker, over nearly $500 million of support to the agriculture sector on top of the existing BRM supports. I agree with her. We need to do more on being able to move forward on the implementation and restoring what the Harper government had cut back in 2013. But will the member at least recognize that there was a considerable amount of language for farmers and the support for local food security?
The honourable member for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
I'd like to thank my colleague for his comments and his questions, but I'd like to point out that of the new money that was put out by this government, most of it was reallocated from other programs that are already budgeted for under the every year's budget. And the carbon tax. I've had opportunities to meet with farmers already from across this country, and I will continue meeting with farmers. I talked with farmers from Simcoe County last week, a couple weeks ago, and he was kind enough to supply me with a copy of his natural gas bill. So farmers' expenses keep going up, and for the period from July 15th to the 18th, his carbon charge was almost $1,300. So tax, and then you pay a tax on a tax. So if you claim to be listening to farmers, you're missing the point. There's no alternative energy source for grain farmers. They have to use the propane or natural gas, and it just keeps costing more, and it's going to cost Canadians more when they put their food on their tables.
That's right.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières. L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières. Est-ce que vous vouliez parler? Je vois que votre main est levée.
Oui. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je joins ma voix aux autres députés de la Chambre pour, avant de répondre à ma collègue, pour souligner et remercier le travail des préposés et des bénévoles qui étaient en première ligne pendant la pandémie. Et cette deuxième vague qui arrive, ils seront sûrement sollicités beaucoup. Pour ce qui est des agriculteurs, la position du Bloc québécois, nous demandons le respect de la gestion de l'offre et je voudrais savoir le point de vue de ma collègue sur cette demande de dédommagement aux agriculteurs qui sont sous la gestion de l'offre qui, nous espérons, sera pleine et équitable pour les accords commerciaux. Merci.
Our member for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
Well, this is just another example of how this government keeps telling farmers they're going to do something and we haven't seen any actions. Dairy farmers have been promised compensation under some of the trade agreements that we've gone, the TPP and CETA, and they still have yet to see any action. So, you know, I agree with the member. This government needs to continue to live up to their words and not just keep giving us platitudes. We want to see concrete actions and help for our farmers because we need them to help our economy and recover from COVID, and without farmers, we have no food on our tables.
Yep.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford, a brief question, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I also want to congratulate my colleague on her appointment to her new critic role. I agree very much with her that us stopping work of the committee through prorogation, that was very unfortunate. I also just wanted to ask about her thoughts on compensation, just maybe have her add to her previous answer, just how important, how long we've had to wait for this. It's really time for our supply managed sectors to see this concrete action. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Answer from the member for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex.
Thank you to my colleague. I look forward to working with you and continuing to work with you on Agriculture Committee, and hopefully we'll be able to have those meetings like you mentioned. We also had some emergency meetings planned prior to prorogation where we would be able to hear from our friends in the supply managed sector with the chickens and turkey and eggs, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to have those meetings where we can ask the government why they haven't paid them what they promised them as compensation from the previous trade agreements. Thank you, Madam Speaker.